Bien, compañeros, bienvenidos al segundo curso de inglés. Vamos a basarnos, como siempre, en el material didáctico que nos proporciona la Preparatoria 22 en este libro, más algunas actividades extra que se pudieran realizar dependiendo la velocidad con la que avance el semestre. Como siempre, recuerden, se explica la clase en inglés y al final hago un resumen en español sobre los temas tratados, explicados. Vamos a comenzar el día de hoy, en nuestro primer video, por aprender la unidad 1 de nuestro libro. En la unidad 1 de nuestro libro vamos a aprender gramática que nos va a ayudar a utilizarla en el contexto de los alimentos. ¿Ok? Vamos a comenzar entonces por la página 6 y vamos explicando uno por uno los puntos gramaticales, recordando que el libro siempre nos da alguna opción de una plática a modo de ejemplo, una plática que nos permite ver cómo utilizar el vocabulario que estamos aprendiendo y la gramática. Dicho lo anterior, vamos a comenzar nuestra clase en inglés, vamos a dejar el español y después hacemos un repaso en español, ¿ok? So on page 6, we are on page 6. What do we have to do on page 6? Most of all, we have to learn new vocabulary about the things that we eat every day, like talking about fruits, talking about vegetables, talking about meat, steaks, dairy products, and other kind of stuff, right? That's the first thing that we have to do, to learn the vocabulary that we have on page 6. Now, you have to remember, as I told you before when we were in the first semester, to learn new vocabulary sometimes can be hard, sometimes can be difficult. Don't worry about it, you have to be patient. You have to be patient, you have to study the vocabulary that we have, and sooner or later you are going to learn the new words and the new vocabulary that we have on our page. Now, talking about our first grammar topic, which is countable nouns, and talking about uncountable nouns, right? So that will be countable and uncountable nouns. Now, the question will be, of course, right? The question will be, what's the difference? What's the difference and how do I know? How am I going to know if my noun is countable or if my noun is uncountable? What's the difference and how I'm going to know the difference? I'm going to give you a piece of advice, alright? Talking about countable things, let's going to say that countable things are the kind of nouns that you have hold in your hand, right? For example, let's going to talk fruits in general, vegetables, that will be right. Fruit and vegetable will be a clue. Those are countable nouns, all right? Now let's going to see about what are the kind of nouns that are uncountable. Uncountable nouns will be something, for example, like liquids, right? Liquids are things that we can't count. Those are going to be uncountable things. Like, for example, water, juice, wine, for example, right? Or what about lemonade? Those are going to be uncountable things, liquids in general. What other things are going to be uncountable? For example, salt, right, is going to be also an uncountable noun. Sugar is going to be another uncountable noun that we have to learn. What about cafe? It's going to be also another uncountable noun, right? Things like cheese, or even though meat, cheese, lemonade, salt, sugar, cafe, juice, wine, water, liquids in general are going to be uncountable things. And countable things, on the other hand, are going to be things such as fruits and such as vegetables, alright? Now that we learned the difference between uncountable and countable things, I'm going to explain this in Spanish, alright? Ahora vamos a hacer una pausa para explicar esta parte en español. Bien, la primera parte de la gramática del libro nos permite ver la diferencia entre nuestros sustantivos contables y nuestros sustantivos que no se pueden contar. Como regla general vamos a poner este ejemplo a manera de guía. Frutas y vegetales son cuestiones que podemos contar. Por el contrario, líquidos tales como el agua, el jugo, el vino, o cuestiones como la sal, el azúcar, el café, la limonada, el queso, la carne, son cosas que no podemos contar. And that's the difference, right? That's the difference between countable nouns and uncountable nouns. Now, let's go to see another thing that we have to learn. Talking about when I'm going to use how much and when do I have to use how many, right? That's going to be another thing that we have to learn. How much or how many. Alright? Let me give you a clue, guys. Alright? We are going to use how much with uncountable things. Alright? We are going to use how much with uncountable things. How much will be uncountable nouns. How many we are going to use, on the other hand, countable nouns. Right? Such as the things that I have already explained to you guys. Now, this is the rule. This is the rule in general, right? This is the rule. But as you may know, every rule has an exception, right? Every rule has an exception. Let me give you the exception that we have in this rule. As I told you before, we are going to use how much for uncountable things, and we are going to use how many for countable things. I'm going to make a pause to explain to you this in Spanish, guys. Ahora vamos a hacer la parte en la que explicamos en español. Bien, la siguiente parte de nuestro libro viene la pregunta en la gramática de cuándo utilizar how many y cuándo utilizar how much. Como les explicaba en inglés, por regla general vamos a utilizar how much cuando tengamos sustantivos que no son objeto para contarse, que no podemos contar, tales como los ejemplos que anoté hace un momento. Y vamos a utilizar al contrario how many cuando tengamos sustantivos que podamos contar, tales como frutas y vegetales, el ejemplo que ponía hace un momento. Esa es la regla general. Sin embargo, como les mencionaba en inglés, cada regla tiene su excepción. Vamos a ver algunas excepciones en las cuales tenemos un sustantivo que podemos contar, pero que no vamos a utilizar how many. Aunque es un sustantivo que podemos contar, por excepción a la regla vamos a utilizar how much. And let's go to see an example, right? Talking about something such as the money. Alright? The money is something that we have to count, alright? If I want to know how much money do I have in my wallet, I have to take out my wallet and say I have, I don't know, $5,000, alright? That will be my dream. Or 2 pesos, for example, that will be. If I want to make a question, how many money do you have? Let's going to write that on the chalkboard. How many money do you have? Even though, this is deception, right? This is deception. Even though my noun, money, it's something that we can't count, even though this is going to be incorrect. We can't say that. We have to use how much. For example, right? We have to use how much, and that is going to be correct. How much money do you have? Or do we need? Now let's go to explain that in Spanish. Bien, como excepción a la regla, nuestro sustantivo, en este caso, dinero, obviamente es algo que podemos contar, es algo que siempre contamos cuánto dinero tenemos. Tenemos $100, tenemos 100 pesos, tenemos 100 euros, etc. Sin embargo, como excepción a la regla, aunque es un sustantivo que yo puedo contar y por lo tanto tendría que utilizar en teoría how many, la realidad del lenguaje me lleva a utilizar how much. Esa, por ejemplo, es una excepción entre sustantivos contables que aunque sean contables tendremos que utilizar how much money do you have? How much money do we need for buy the tickets? Alright? And that will be one. Now, other things that we have to learn. Alright? Other topic will be when we are going to use, let me write it on the chalkboard. That will be the other one. When we are going to use a or when we are going to use an. Now, this is a topic that we already learned when we were on the first book, when we were learning English as a foreign language. This is a topic that we already learned. Do you remember what's the clue to know when do I have to use a and when do I have to use an? As we learned with the first book, I'm going to use a when I have a noun that doesn't start with a vowel. If my noun doesn't start with a vowel, I'm going to use a, for example. Alright, for example, that is a noun that doesn't start with a vowel. But what happens if I have a noun that actually starts with a vowel? For example, that's the moment when I have to use an. And that's the only difference, alright? If my noun starts with a vowel, I have to use an. If my noun doesn't start with a vowel, I'm going to use, on the other hand, A, and that is going to be. Now let me explain to you this in Spanish. Ahora vamos a explicarlo en español. Recuerden, este es un tema que ya vimos en el primer libro de inglés, que sin embargo nuestro libro nos vuelve a reforzar esa parte gramática. ¿Cuándo voy a utilizar, decirlo totalmente en español, a, o cuándo voy a utilizar an? Como explicaba en inglés, si mi sustantivo inicia con una vocal, voy a anteponer an, siempre. En este caso, mi sustantivo manzana inicia con una vocal, por lo tanto antepongo an. Por el contrario, en este caso, mi sustantivo banana no inicia con una vocal, por lo tanto voy a utilizar a. Recordando que estamos hablando de sustantivos singulares. Ok, hay que recordar que estamos hablando de sustantivos singulares. So we are going to use an when my noun starts with a vowel. On the other hand, we are going to use only a if my noun doesn't start with a vowel. Now, let's go into see the topic about right here. When we are going to use some, when we are going to use any. As we have the explanation in our book, I'm going to use some with affirmative sentence and with plural and singular nouns. Plural nouns or plural countable things, and I'm going to use any for negative and when I have plural nouns. Right? That's going to be another thing that we have to learn. For example, let's go into see the example that I wrote already here in the chalkboard that we have in our book on page 4. Alright, let's go into see this example. We already learned when we are going to use an, or some, right? Now, we have, what do we have? Plural nouns, right? We are talking about plural nouns, lemons. So, we are going to use some for affirmative sentence, plural nouns, right? So, this is affirmative sentence, and I have to use we have. What are we going to write? Some, my plural noun, affirmative sentence. So that will be, we have some. Right? Why? Because it's plural and it's affirmative. We have some lemons. Now I have a singular noun over here. And my noun doesn't start with a vowel. What do I have to write? We have lemons, a carrot, and my noun doesn't start with a vowel. I can write an, a, or some sachets in the fridge. Now let's go into explain that in Spanish. Vamos a verlo en español. Bien, vamos a utilizar some, que la traducción sería como algo o algunos. Tenemos algo, tenemos algunos. Vamos a utilizarlo para oraciones afirmativas y vamos a utilizarlo para sustantivos plurales. ¿Ok? Ahora, vamos a utilizar any, que la traducción sería igual como algo o algunos, o tenemos algo de. Vamos a utilizarlo, sin embargo, al contrario, para oraciones negativas y para cuestiones en plural, sustantivos en plural. Ahorita vamos a poner un ejemplo aquí. Bien, En nuestra página 7 tenemos un ejercicio que tenemos que completar utilizando la gramática que acabamos de aprender. Vamos a ver el ejemplo. Nosotros tenemos, porque es más bien como una forma de afirmación. Nosotros tenemos algunos limones. Hablamos en plural. Plural, utilizo some porque es afirmativo. We have some lemons. Después tenemos un sustantivo que es singular, que no inicia con una vocal, por lo tanto, a carrot, and, ¿y qué seguiría aquí? ¿Ok? Recuerden, hay que irlo trabajando en el cuaderno, esto de manera de ejemplo. Por el contrario, si quiero utilizar any, voy a utilizarlo en un contexto negativo para sustantivos plurales. And that will be, for example, we, negative sentence, right? We do not have for example, right? Now let's going to remember that we are going to use some and any with countable and uncountable nouns. Talking about plural nouns, alright? Countable and uncountable nouns. That is going to be an example when we are going to use some and when we are going to use any. This sentence right here is negative, right? We don't have negative any milk in the refrigerator or in the fridge. That will be also correct. Alright, now let's go to explain that in Spanish. Vamos a explicarlo en español. Recordando que vamos a utilizarlos para sustantivos contables y sustantivos no contables. Repito, sustantivos contables y sustantivos no contables. Tal cual viene en nuestro libro para negación o para una afirmación. En este caso lo usamos para una afirmación porque sí tenemos este sustantivo y en este caso lo estamos negando y utilizo any porque no tenemos este sustantivo que es incontable. Recuerden porque es un líquido, como ya lo explicaba en inglés. No tenemos este sustantivo incontable. Okay? And that's the difference between some, any, a or an. And that's also the difference between how much and how many. Una vez que vimos la diferencia entre cuándo utilizar how much, how many, some, any, a or an, let's going to turn on our page. Remember, this is a thing that you have to learn from your own, right? This is a thing that you have to learn from your own. Recuerden que el vocabulario es algo que tenemos que aprender cada uno en casa. Al principio siempre es difícil, pero poco a poco vamos aprendiéndolo. Bien, una vez que aprendimos este vocabulario, podemos hacer una conversación similar aquí. Personas hablando sobre qué necesitan ir a comprar o qué quieren ordenar para comer. Alright? But that will be, let's go to turn our page. And let's going to be on page 8. Ahora vámonos a la página 8. Vámonos a la página 8 para explicar el verbo modal would y una conversación diferente a la que tenemos en nuestro libro, aunque la de nuestro libro funciona perfectamente. Let's going to write an example here on the chalkboard, alright? Someone is going to be the waiter. Someone is going to be the waiter. Someone is going to be the client. Or the person who wants to eat something, right? What is going to say the waiter? The waiter of the beginning, sorry about it. What is going to say the waiter? The waiter is going to say something like, "Good evening. Gentlemen." Good evening, gentlemen. What can I offer you today, for example? That's something that the waiter has to say, right? What is going to say the client? Good evening. Now, we are going to use the modal verb that we learned in our first book. In our first book, do you remember? Can I see the menu? Waiter. Sure. Here is it. Alright? Let's go to explain that in Spanish. Vamos a ver este verbo modal que aprendimos en el nivel 1 como petición que hace el cliente o el comensal, ¿sí? Para preguntar si puede ver el menú. Now let's go to learn another modal verb that we have on this exercise. Ahora vamos a aprender nuestro segundo verbo modal que viene a colación a esta plática. Sure, here is it. It's going to say the waiter, and the person who wants to eat is going to say something like, I would like to. I would like to eat, for example, a steak and a salad, please. That is going to say. What is going to say the waiter? Certainly, sir. Can I offer you something to drink? It's going to say the waiter, right? I will take the, for example, right? I will take the milkshake. I will take a wine. I will take orange juice. I will take a glass of water, for example, right? That's going to be. Now, let's go to see the moment when we are going to use the verb would. Let's go to say our first grammar thing talking about the modal verbs. When we are going to use the verb would. Para terminar este video, vamos a ver el uso del verbo modal would. Alright? Talking about how do we combine the verb would. And what's the meaning of the verb would, right? So we have the personal pronouns That is going to be I would. You would. He, she would. We would. And how's the contraction, right? That is going to be we just have to add an D at the end. That's going to be everything. I will, you will, he will, we will, you will, and finally, they will. Now, when we are going to use the verb will, or what's the meaning of the verb will? We are going to, there are so many different moments when we are going to use the verb will. We have to understand that. Even though the first explanation that I can give to you guys will be, we are going to use the verb will when we want to be polite, right? When we want to be polite, when we want to ask for something or to say about something and we want to be polite, we are going to use the verb will. I will like to, he will like to, we will like to explain to you this topic, alright? Now let's going to explain to you this in Spanish. Ahora vamos a explicar en español para terminar con este video. Bien, el segundo verbo modal que vamos a aprender, porque ya aprendimos el verbo modal can en el primer semestre. Recuerden, el segundo verbo modal que vamos a aprender es el verbo would. Aunque este verbo tiene diferentes contextos en los cuales lo podemos utilizar y diferentes reglas gramaticales, vamos a ver el contexto que nos plantea el libro. Vamos a utilizar el verbo would, como podemos ver, la conjugación es igual para todos los pronombres personales. Aquí tenemos la contracción que viene en nuestro libro. Cuando queramos ser más educados o queramos hacer énfasis en una petición que se hace de manera cortés, la traducción sería a lo que pregunta el mesero: What would you like to eat today, sir? ¿Qué le apetecería? ¿Qué le gustaría comer hoy al caballero? I would like to, and for drink, I would like to drink, a mí me gustaría beber, a mí me gustaría comer. Siempre recuerden, cuando utilizamos un verbo modal, el siguiente verbo que sigue no se conjuga, se queda en forma infinitiva. I would like to speak German. For example, me gustaría hablar alemán, por ejemplo. Nuestro segundo verbo, que en este caso es hablar, no se conjuga, se queda en forma infinitiva porque tengo mi verbo modal. Bien, entonces recapitulando los temas que vimos, hay que aprender el vocabulario de los alimentos, hay que diferenciar entre sustantivos que son contables, sustantivos que no son contables. Acuérdense la acepción que les planteaba en el pizarrón, las reglas gramaticales y por último, las conversaciones que vienen en nuestro libro. Recuerden que solamente esa manera de guía es un ejemplo de cómo podemos utilizar el vocabulario y la gramática, más obviamente no son las únicas, ¿no? Como la que yo escribí en el pizarrón, puede haber muchas diferentes, solamente son guías de conversación. Vamos a escribir por último vocabulario que podemos utilizar en el restaurante. Vamos a ver por último que aunque no viene en nuestro libro, aunque no viene en nuestro libro, es vocabulario que podemos utilizar. Vamos a empezar a anotarlo. Esta palabra obviamente sí viene en nuestro libro, ¿no? Es una palabra internacional, la pronunciación es diferente. Este también viene en nuestro libro. Hay que hacer énfasis en este vocabulario, ¿no? What about napkin? I think that will be all. There are other kind of things that we can learn, but those are the things that we can use, alright? What about, what about to book a table? To book a table, right? This is vocabulary that we can use when we are in a restaurant, for example. Right, talking about the bill or the check. Excuse me, waiter. Yeah, we will take the bill, the check. What about the tip? The tip is the money that the waiter is waiting for, right? Talking about if he made a good service or if he made a worse service. The menu, of course, is something that we have to do. The waiter, the napkin, and to book a table, right? Bien, un poco el vocabulario que podemos utilizar en un restaurante, ¿no? Tenemos la cuenta, es lo mismo para el inglés británico o el inglés estadounidense. La propina para nuestro mesero. Obviamente esta es una palabra internacional. El menú, el mesero, la servilleta y I would like to book a table, please. Let's going to talk about it is a fancy restaurant. So I have to book a table first in order to be able to have a spike right there. Si es un restaurante, por ejemplo, donde tengamos que hacer una reservación previo a asistir, I would like, recuerden, utilicemos nuestro verbo modal que acabamos de aprender. I would like me gustaría reservar una mesa. Nuestro verbo reservar se queda en infinitivo porque estoy utilizando un verbo modal. ¿Alguna otra palabra que pudiéramos anotar? Podría ser a bottle, even though I think that we have this word in our book. Me parece que esta ya la tenemos en nuestro libro. But it could be a bottle of wine, for example, and that will be everything. Bueno, utilicen este vocabulario para simular una conversación en un restaurante, la propina, la cuenta, ¿no? Una botella de algo, en este caso de vino, el menú. I would like to see the menu. If I want to ask for the menu, I have to say, I would like to see the menu. Si quiero preguntar por el menú, voy a utilizar mi verbo modal. I would like to see the menu. Me gustaría ver el menú, por favor. Certainly is going to say the waiter. Or, please waiter, I need another napkin. Por favor, necesito otra servilleta. For example, right? Alright, that will be our first video. And the next video we are going to learn other things. Bueno, con eso concluimos nuestro primer video. Con eso damos inicio a nuestro segundo semestre en la materia de lengua extranjera. Recuerden, por favor, hacer énfasis en aprender el vocabulario. Aprender el vocabulario que tenemos en nuestro libro. La gramática ya está explicada. Vamos a trabajar, como siempre, mandando evidencias de nuestro trabajo. Ya saben, como trabajamos el primer semestre, sea por Google Classroom o a través de fotografías por un WhatsApp, por un correo electrónico, como sea más fácil. La finalidad es que entreguen evidencias de trabajo para probar. Y hay que responder nuestro libro para también enviar evidencias de trabajo. Y como siempre, recuerden anotar en su cuaderno los apuntes del pizarrón. Con eso sería todo por hoy. Nos vemos en el siguiente video, compañeros.